the wonders of video are that I can now start again and say, as I did before, that we don't allow anyone to graduate, and that the next speaker is a case in point. This is Julie van Petegem, who got her dissertation, got her PhD. So this is 2014. Was it 2013? 13. So very recent dissertation, and she is now an assistant professor at Hunter College. And her dissertation was on Dante and Ovid and had wonderful charts. And right from the beginning, we were thinking these charts have to live. And what better way to have them live than on Digital Dante? So Julie's actually got, in a sense, a dedicated section of Digital Dante called Intertextual Digital Dante, because obviously this can grow forever. So Julie van Petegem talking about intertextual Digital Dante.
So first, some thank you. So I have to thank you, Theo, for your support and your help in finding a digital home for those charts. First, at the Digital Humanities Center, where for one semester I was an intern and could work on the project. And I have to thank Barbara Rockenbach and Alex Gill for that wonderful opportunity. And then to Cedars, where Rebecca Kennison welcomed the project with open arms, and Mark Newton and Jack Donovan, the lead application developer, really helped me to bring this project online. So let me start by briefly explaining what the Intertextual Digital Dante is. It is a digital edition of Dante's Divine Comedy that highlights, quite literally, its intertextual passages. In the current first phase, it's Ovidian intertextuality. It transforms the concept of a paper concordance, a list of corresponding passages, into an interactive digital reading and research tool that allows readers, the users of the site, to read and search the intertextual passages in context. In my presentation today, I'll talk a little bit more. I'll explain the definition a little bit more. And I also want to talk about the origin of the project, the idea and the vision behind it. Then I'll give you a little tour of the current site, and I will finish with a couple of words on the next step and the future of the project. So the idea to create a website, and really started with the idea to create a website about Ovidian intertextuality in the Divine Comedy, started when I was working on my dissertation on the reception of the writings of the Latin poet Ovid in medieval Italian literature. And Dante, of course, was not the only Italian reader of Ovid. In fact, I found that the vernacular poets writing before and during Dante's time were often overlooked as readers of Ovid, and part of the research was to provide that missing segment in the reception history of Ovid in the medieval, in the Italian Middle Ages. But nevertheless, among that group of writers about Ovid, Dante occupied an exceptional role. He's the one who uses Ovid by far the most, and there's really no comparison. And also the way in which he uses Ovid distinguishes him from his predecessors and contemporaries. Dante frequently cites Ovid in his treatises, and in the Divine Comedy, he works very closely with the language of Ovid, and Ovid is there the second most used Latin author after Virgil. And there's been a lot of excellent scholarship on Dante and Ovid. There are beautiful close readings of Ovidian passages in the comedy, short, incisive introductions to the topic. But to have the most general idea of Dante's use of Ovidian sources, that all-including approach to the topic, you need to go to the concordances. And just a quick word on the word concordance, because in literature it's used in two ways. And perhaps the most common way is that the concordance as an alphabetical list of all the words that appear in the work of an author with references to the specific instances where these words are used. So we Dantisti are very happy to have that kind of concordance online, and we can quickly look up where Dante uses certain words, how often. But then there's a second use of the word, and for highly elusive, well-studied works of literature, there exist intertextual concordances. So that list all the instances where that work makes use of others. And when it comes to Dante and Ovid, I had a few of those intertextual concordances to work with, and I listed them here on this slide. But I also decided to compile my own concordance, my own charts. And I'll briefly talk about the reasons to do so, because they are closely related then with the idea of bringing those lists online. So first, let's look at an excerpt on Edward Moore's concordance, which is an invaluable resource. And there you see, because I want to talk about the organization. There you see that he starts with the Metamorphoses, and he gives you the passages in the order they appear in Book 1 of the Metamorphoses, in Ovid's writing, and then you see the corresponding passages in Dante. And on the far left, you see those ABC, those are Moore's categories of intertextuality. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. I did a couple of things differently in my concordance. First, I changed the order. I was really interested in the distribution of Ovidian material in the comedy. So all the previous ones started with Ovid. I wanted to start with Dante and to find out where are those Ovidian canto, where are the Ovidian textual silences. And second, I tried to add as much context as possible in an Excel spreadsheet in landscape format that was going to be that appendix to my dissertation. So you see, I have context of it, context Dante, I have abbreviations because I couldn't just get it in those columns. And then another kind of context I provided were the categories. I further divided them in word choice and simile. You see here, there's more, and I will talk about them more in their digital form. So I had my own list, but I still felt the limitation of that paper version. And I started to think more seriously about how to overcome them and use technology to do so. And the following slide, here you see my original thinking about it, what I thought that the transformation from paper to digital could do. So on paper, just one direction. You had to start with Dante, or you had to start with Ovid. And I imagined you could just, in the digital format, easily switch between them. On paper, just 2 citations. On the digital format, I imagined that I could see those passages in context and read on. Very difficult to sort on paper. I wanted to see all my similes. That was kind of hard. And I imagined in the digital format, there would be all different ways to search the results. And now, months of work reduced to one slide. So I participated in an NIH institute previously mentioned, the Institute for Advanced Topics in the Digital Humanities at Tufts University, and with the title, Working with Text in a Digital Age. And that title really spoke to me because I wanted to transform that paper into a digital format. Then when I returned, I was very lucky to be chosen as one of the first Digital Center interns and worked for a semester on the project at the Digital Humanities Center here in the library. Then after I graduated, started my current position at Hunter College. I was very happy that at Cedars, I was given the opportunity to continue working on the project and develop. Yes, and in developing the intertextual project as part of the Digital Dante relaunch. Before we go to the side, I want to show you this image of Dante, a portrait by Luca Signorelli. And Christopher Klein has, in his writing on intertextuality in the comedy, has described this portrait as the image of Dante doing intertextuality. I love this. So you see Dante sitting at his desk, two books open, two more lying there. With his right finger, he's pointing at one passage, and he has his left finger on another line in the second book, as indicating the relationship, the correspondence between the two passages. And this is a practice I believe we readers of the Divine Comedy are very familiar with, having the text of the Divine Comedy open, another edition on our desk, as many editions, it was mentioned before, on our desk, and looking for trying to understand the connection between the two passages. So now let's look at the intertextual digital Dante, which will allow us to do this reading and researching online. Okay, so this is the intertextual reading and research tool. There's a separate page that gives you a little bit more information and background, what I'm saying here. So a little tour of the site. So on the top box, just introduction, explaining to anyone happening on that page how it works. But then front and center, two columns of text. On the left side, we have the Inferno, all of the Divine Comedy, and on the right side, we have all of Ovid's works used by Dante in the comedy. And I have to add that I'm very delighted that we have all of Ovid's texts available at launch. Ovid's Metamorphoses receive a lot of critical attention, but Dante also read those other works by Ovid. And actually, my examples will show a couple of them. So I'm very happy we have all of Ovid in the launch version. Both columns, both texts are scrollable. So that means that you can start reading Divine Comedy from Canto 1 and so on, or you can start with Ovid, the Amoris, and read on. But you don't need to read in order, and you don't need to scroll up and down to move within the text. There are also two clickable table of contents that allow you to jump to a specific canto in the Divine Comedy or go to a specific work by Ovid, and then once you're in that work, go to a poem or a book of your choice. And then on the bottom of the page, you see my categories. So you see the word choice and the simile I mentioned before, and I will talk in a moment why I use these categories and how they are used on the site. But first, let's go back to the text column and take a closer look at how this site works as a digital concordance, how it highlights Ovidian intertextuality. Every time my concordance lists an intertextual passage, this is marked in the text with the icon of the pointing finger. And that is a little reference to Dante with his two fingers making that connection between two passages, but more obviously also a nod to the manicula in medieval and Renaissance manuscripts, those little drawings of hands with a finger that point out a specific passage that is interesting or important. And on the side here, the pointing finger is used as a visual marker that something intertextual is going on, so to speak. The visual component is very nice because your eye immediately tells you that this is a very Ovidian canto or not. The presence or the absence of Ovidian passages can be seen that way. And I took out a slide where you had 7 of them in one passage, so it was a very Ovidian moment. But already here you see immediately that already at verse 4 of the Inferno, we encounter our first Ovidian passage. And the pointing finger icon is clickable. And when you do that, it matches up the two corresponding passages in Dante and Ovid. And of course, I want to show you how that works. This is the live demo part. Mine.
He's trying using sound.
No, there's no sound. All right. So now I will click. All right, so what happened? I clicked the pointing finger. Yes, it happened. That's already great. So the passage in Dante is highlighted. So before we just had the pointing finger to the first verse, now the entire passage is highlighted. And then in the right column, we see that the Ovid text, and I should show this, it's so fun to see. It scrolled all the way down to the Tristia, to book 3, to the 6th letter. And it was fast. Yeah, it was very fast. That's why you want to do it a couple of times. I did a lot of clicking over the weekend. And so you see the passages side by side, and also the passage in Ovid is highlighted. A few more things changed by clicking the icon. The first thing, and you actually can't see it here, it's just cut off, but we're in book 1, in Canto 1, so you can see that in the table of contents, and you can see it here. 3.6 is in red, so it's a very nice feature because often you don't see the canto number, you don't see the title of the work, and so you have immediately a way to find out where am I in the text. So that's the first change. And then the second change is that on top, a comment appeared in that top box. And these comments are a first way in which I provide more context to the intertextual passages. For each pair of corresponding passages, I wrote a comment situating the passage within Dante's and Ovid's work and explaining the connection between them. The second way in which I intend this site to provide context is through the scrollability of the text, because it provides the opportunity to see what immediately came before and after in the text. So as we all know, the study of intertextual passages in Dante cannot be limited just to corresponding passages. The textual context is a very important element to the interpretation. And the intertextual digital Dante greatly facilitates this kind of reading and research. For instance, it is already very interesting that the first Ovidian source text that Dante works with in the comedy is not the expected, much more used Metamorphoses, but one of Ovid's exile letters. So on the site, you can go and read that entire letter 3.6, and then see that in that letter, Ovid talks about how the good path seems closed off to him. So it brings up that dritta via smarrita, and that he also talks about the harshment of his punishment and his exile. So I can't really unpack that connection here, but I think that by reusing those Ovidian verses and bringing up that letter 3.6 and those themes, that Dante, immediately at the opening of the Divine Comedy, he brings up Ovid as a fellow undeserved exile. So actually that was a discovery thanks to the site. Now we go back to my PowerPoint. Now we need to jump a little. This. Okay. The categories. So the categories are another element that I transported from my paper concordance then to the digital side. And for one, on the site, these categories can be searched much more easily than on paper. You can pull up all the word choices, similes at once. Why the categories? In the existing concordances, I noticed that first, there wasn't a lot of documentation on why passages were included, and second, if these criteria were discussed, and Edward Moore does describe them in detail, then the focus was on the degree of similarity between the source text and the passage inspired by it, how certain it was Dante had, in this case, Ovid in mind. And I found that these categories in Moore added little extra information about Dante's specific use of Ovid, and decided to further divide the entries of my concordance into these categories, and you see listed on the slide, as they provide more information about specific stylistic, structural, and rhetorical aspects of Dante's text reuse that the general numbers easily mask. And I give a concrete example. In one sense, Inferno is the most Ovidian canto, because you find the highest total number of intertextual passages there. But if you look at the numbers for the simile, a highly distinguishing feature of Dante's writing, then you see that Dante actually uses Ovid-inspired similes constantly through the Divine Comedy, inserting a similar amount of them, about 25, in all three canticles, and even Paradiso is the highest number. So this is the kind of information that you just, if you look at the general numbers, that is lost. And it's a very important piece of information because it makes a strong case to focus on the presence of Ovid in Purgatory and Paradiso and go beyond Inferno. So a few more examples. So the example from Inferno 1, that was a word choice category. And those are the more obscure references, I like to call them. They're tucked away into the text of the comedy. They're not immediately apparent. And in contrast, the second category, characters, events, and places, is straightforward. And on the side, they can be searched separately. Let me quickly show you how that works. So it's a drop-up menu. So I clicked on Mira. There you go. And then that brings up those two passages. And very nice, you see then, I point this also out in my commentary, Dante uses scelerata to talk about it, and Ovid has scalus. I can't see it from here, but it has it twice in the text of Ovid. So really making that comment, bringing together the two passages. Then for the similes, again, a drop-up menu, and then you see, I can't even see it for here, but I know that in the second, third part of, you immediately see that it's, the similes are much more present toward the end. And I selected Inferno 30, also 30. So I went to that passage, I clicked it, and so you see there are two Ovidian sources there. You see that the first, describing the rage of the falsifiers compared with the rage of Adamus, and Ovid is a source in the Metamorphosis, and the comment explains why that is. I can't go into that here. And also the Fasti, Ovid's Fasti, is a second source, and again, it explains how that is. So these are just a few quick examples of how to use the site to read and research Ovidian intertextual passages in the comedy. And it's really my hope to incorporate more text, more authors, to accomplish that ultimate goal, to have the digital edition of the Divine Comedy and Dante's other works that include all of his classical, biblical, and vernacular sources. But I have to say it's fitting that this project starts with Dante and Ovid. For both authors, novelty is a key concept. To innovate, to change something from the tradition, something old, into something new. I think it's one of the reasons Dante was drawn so much to Ovid. So in that spirit of innovation, the intertextual digital Dante offers a new way to read and research intertextual passages in the Divine Comedy. Thank you.
So that was really, really exciting. And I knew how extraordinary Julie's work was because she did her dissertation with me and I got to read that. I have to really say the technical aspects are unbelievable.
Thank you also to Jack.
I mean, really to Jack, because, I mean, to watch it just suddenly go from way up in the beginning of the Metamorphoses to the Tristia, just like that was just amazing, and it's an extraordinary resource. It's going to be magnificent, and it's so well done that I would think that there would be many people wanting to do it now with adding other authors that could bring under your wing. So Julie, you know that Akash is a managing editor, Julie is an associate editor. We're now going to, of Digital Dante. Later, we're going to hear from our assistant editors, but in the meantime, we're going to have two folks who are Columbia graduates, who are not technically on the masthead, but who are exactly the sort of people with whom we would like to collaborate, either through links or other. In the case of Christina, we've shamelessly used her connection to the artist to bring it into Digital Dante, and we have all sorts of ways that we want to use Martin also. Martin is actually a Columbia College graduate. I forgot the year of the college graduation. 99, and he's a Columbia PhD, 2005, with a wonderful dissertation, which he also worked with Joan Ferrante, so we have kind of a wonderful reunion here. And his dissertation was a turning point for me because it really brought material culture to the forefront, since he used a codex of Boccaccio, in which Boccaccio transcribed both Dante and Petrarch and Cavalcanti and other authors as his way of getting into the literary tradition. And the book that came out of that dissertation came out in 2013 or 14, Cambridge University Press, Boccaccio and the Invention of Italian Literature, Dante, Petrarch, Cavalcanti, and the Authority of the Vernacular. Martin's current book project is Dante and the Afterlife of the Book, Rematerializing Literary History. And I hope that you find Digital Dante a resource and something on which you would like to put things as you work on that. So, Martin Eisner.
Thanks, and thanks for the invitation to come and talk to you. It's been really interesting hearing how this site is evolving and how many points of entry there will be for scholars and students as well. So if this is like a sneak, what did you call it? A sneak peek? Then this is a preview of a sneak peek. So whereas Digital Dante has put together these texts, translations, intertexts, images, commentary. Duke's project, which is called Dante's Library, is rooted in material textuality. That is, it aims to reconstruct in material form what would have been Dante's library, broadly understood. That is to say, both specific books as well as artistic representations that he might have known. Okay, so it's particularly interested in these material manifestations of things. Is this gonna do something, you think? Okay, good. Okay, so it's going to build on some recent scholarship about, there's a lot of research projects right now on reconstructing the library in Santa Croce, the theological environment in Florence. It's going to build on a lot of this scholarship to assemble a site that's going to consist of about 100 objects to begin with. So it'll serve as a portal, we think, for students and scholars with accompanying paragraphs like that wonderful thing that came up with that intertextual connection, right, where you're guiding readers, not just giving them texts for them to figure out what to do with, but actually pointing them in interpretive directions. I'm really excited to be talking about this project here because the roots of it go back to the conference that Teo organized in 2000, Dante 2000, where there was a remarkable paper that struck me for the simplicity of its apparently innocent interrogative: what did the first copies of the comedy look like? John Ahern's question appeared to be incredibly simple, but it did not yield any immediate answers. On the basis of later manuscripts, one could posit some features that those earliest copies must have had, but everything had to remain hypothetical, if not speculative. In other words, it was something that could only be answered in virtual form, right, by positing the genealogies of formal features found in later manuscripts as likely to have been present in the earliest copies. Like all good questions, that question, what did the first copies of the comedy look like, was one whose time had come. By 2000, access to those materials were no longer confined to Italian philologists in situ, but they were beginning to be made available online, right? Things like the Dante Online project by the Società Dantesca put up several manuscripts of the comedy that could be consulted in great detail. And at the same time, there was the access to material, and there was a growing sense of the hermeneutic value of these material texts, right? That they had significance in and of themselves, that they could tell us about modes of reading and modes of interpretation. So in the same way, I think the time has come to expand this question and interrogate how these material containers that Dante might have used could be meaningful for understanding how he worked, what he saw, and what he read. So in some instances, these are, I apologize for this phrase, but they're low-hanging fruit. They're things that are just right there to be put up and are easy to access and present. Others will reveal new problems and new issues that hopefully will spur new scholarship. So I want to say here, before I get into sort of one example of what I'm talking about, that my own interest in historicizing Dante is actually a product of being very interested in Dante's reception, from Boccaccio's anthology of Dante's vernacular works to Rossetti and beyond. So in the first book, it was about how Boccaccio used Dante, Petrarch, and Cavalcanti to construct a literary community. And in my new work, it's about how the Vita Nuova has been transformed in its materializations to the present. But this has been a sort of permanent theme. So in another essay, I looked at 19th century representations, we've seen these before, of Francesca reading, which in an essay I published argued that there was a genealogical relationship between these representations of Francesca reading and scenes of the Annunciation, a connection that ultimately led me to propose that Dante had medieval images of the Annunciation in his mind when he chose to represent Paolo Francesco falling in love over a book, a scene that is, of course, as Boccaccio, among others, notes, completely Dante's invention. So as I explored this topic, I discovered that there was no reliable resource for the apparently simple question of what representations of the Annunciation Dante might have known. This absence was particularly surprising because Dante dedicates such ample space on the first terrace of Purgatorio to describing a scene of the Annunciation as a visual work of art. So Dante is clearly engaging a larger tradition and must have had an image of the Annunciation in mind, not just a single picture of it, but no one had really bothered to suggest what any of these particular objects might have been. Although this relief, this relief from the old Duomo must have been similar to those he probably saw and probably had in mind. But this led to other questions, right? What kinds of crucifixion scenes might he have known, and so on. One would like to have more specific answers to these questions, but any responsible reply must be provisional, because any identification is necessarily based on a number of shifting sources that have to do with texts as well as the history of the traditions of those objects, and so on. So Dante's library then aims to assemble these materials, or assemble materials that can respond to these kinds of questions. Questions about Dante's Bible, his Ovid, his Aristotle, his Boethius. That is, what do they materially look like? What sort of annotations they have, and so on. And Dante's text itself suggests that these are not insignificant questions. In the first canto of the Inferno, for example, when Dante first greets Virgil, even before he identifies Virgil as his autore, he notes the material container through which he first came to know him, that is, via that volume, a word that has its own significant sidereal resonance in the poem. Why? That's not, there we go. Ok, ho degli altri poeti onore e lume, vagliami il lungo studio e grande amore che mi ha fatto cercar lo tuo volume. But what did Dante's copy of Virgil look like? In preparing this talk today, I set myself the apparently simple, straightforward task of responding to this question. What did Dante's copy of Virgil look like? But, as you've already guessed, the answer is not easy to find. The information is not possible to discover online. It is a testament to the power of Dante's vision that if one explores Dante and Virgil and manuscripts, what one finds is numerous images of Dante and Virgil parading through the other world, but no discussion of what manuscripts of Virgil Dante might have seen. Dante's creation of Virgil as a character has so muddied the waters of the World Wide Web that the scholarly question can find no purchase. All one finds is page after page of images of Dante and Virgil in their journey. Now, the word volume itself is not as straightforward as it might appear as one discovers looking through a great old resource, the Dante Dartmouth Project. Because there's a considerable divergence of opinion among the earliest commentators as to whether this volume is only the Aeneid, and here I'll give you a few examples. These are all from the Trecento. Whether it's just the Aeneid or it's the Aeneid and other works of Virgil, such as the Eclogues and Georgics. So when these earliest commentators read volume, then they not only think of a single work, but other works of Virgil that might have been bound together. And I don't think this is insignificant given, say, Statius's experience of Virgil, right? We're both Ovid. I'm sorry. You've already contaminated me. We're both reading of the Aeneid and the Eclogues, right? Are crucial moments in his life. Okay, so learning about what commentators thought of Dante's Virgil, of course, is not the same as learning about Dante's Virgil. To find out how Dante came to know his Virgil, one must ultimately turn to those heavy objects whose mass led to the construction of the building in which we now stand. In one of those books, that's right, I'm talking about books. In one of those books, the Mostra di Codici e Edizioni Dantesche, which was published in 1965, the editors identify a codex that is now in the Laurentian Library, Ashburnham 23, as a copy of the same type as the Aeneid that Dante read. Now, this identification is based on these lines from Aeneid 3, where Dante, this is one of those famous incomplete lines of the Aeneid. I'm gonna, maybe this points, yes. See this incomplete line? When Dante quotes it in the Monarchia, he quotes it, I'm sorry, these were elegant before, but now they're on PowerPoint, so they're not anymore. He fills in the rest of the line with this hemistich, which is found in one particular textual branch of the Aeneid. So we know that he had a copy from that branch of the Aeneid family. And the one that is usually identified, let me see if it's the next slide. There are no more slides. What did I do wrong? Okay. Oh, okay. So we know that it's from this branch of the family, and it gives us a key to identifying what would have been one of those manuscripts. Now, this identification is pretty straightforward old philology, right? The variant is characteristic of a branch of the tradition, but the materiality of this object, that is of Ashburnham 23, here, technology. All right. want to touch any more buttons. So this identification may seem like old philology, and it is, and it's extremely valuable for identifying these things. But what is even more remarkable about Ashburnham 23, and I'm sure you have already noticing this, is right here, right, is that it is one of the, let's see, there are about 35 of them, one of the 35 copies of Virgil that are neumed. That is to say, they have musical annotation for selected parts of the Aeneid. Musicologists know about this, they write about it, but no one, because we don't, okay. These passages are, and now I just note these things in passing, Laocoon on the dangers of the Greeks bearing gifts with special mention of Ulysses as trickster, Aeneas's vision of Hector, whose body still bears the scars of battle. I'm thinking aerial bodies, I fill in the blanks. I'm thinking aerial bodies, I'm thinking Inferno 26. Dido's appeal to Anna, which includes the phrase miserere sorores, that may inform the pilgrim's first words, miserere di me, right? Not only the psalm, but also Dido. Dido's lament upon seeing Aeneas's left behind clothing, and another passage where Aeneas is about to kill Turnus. So these first four passages are all neumed in other manuscripts as well. So these episodes are prominent in the medieval reception of Virgil more broadly. They are the greatest hits. But this needs to be, I think, incorporated into what we're up to. So this image of Ashburnham 23 has been digitized very poorly by Google from a late 19th century reproduction. So what Dante's library aims to do is put new images of these significant pages online, right? And the goal, of course, is not only to catalog these materials, but to curate them. As we've already seen, I think, in these wonderful examples from the Digital Dante project, the goal is to give some introduction, some text that provide both context and point to the significance of the works, as well as their connections to Dante. And there have been some promising excavations of this topic before. That is the more broadly conceived idea of Dante's library. But as you all are probably very familiar with, they've devolved into a set of dead links with the list of works that should be there. So hopefully we're trying to avoid that problem as well. So what will distinguish Dante's library is this concentrated focus on Dante and the emphasis on the hermeneutics of the material text. By emphasizing the materiality of these texts, the project is also open, of course, to other materials such as artworks, architecture, music, that clearly informed Dante. Right? Okay. So since Dante wrote before the emergence of the modern disciplines, this project is necessarily collaborative and multidisciplinary, but also aims to involve students who always ask the darndest questions, right? So and that can lead to fabulous research questions, such as a question that I recently received: what does Dante mean when he refers to the Ethiopians? Who are the Ethiopians for Dante, right? This is a question that can easily be reframed as a research question about Dante's sense of the other that could be focused around single manuscripts that convey medieval ideas about geography and anthropology. So the project here that I'm describing is a sort of well-defined research project that I can see already manifesting itself in the Digital Dante project, that both engages major critical problems and produces new scholarship. By assembling disparate materials in one place, moreover, the site will be useful not only to facilitate new readings of Dante, but also serve as a window onto the medieval and Renaissance worlds more broadly. So at the moment, I'm going to give some minor technical details. At the moment, we've decided to use this open source program, Drupal, to organize, curate, and publish these materials, which are going to, as I mentioned, constitute about 100 objects, distinct images, and manuscript pages. Over time, we would ideally like to expand this, but I think keeping the focus tight and concentrated for the time being is the best approach. The goal is to explore these objects, as you all have emphasized throughout, keeping Dante's work always at the center of the considerations and thinking about these problems through the poem and how they respond to the poem. And for that reason, what you guys have set up seems like a perfect sister, brother. Anyway. Okay. All right, thanks.
So, Martin received his PhD from Columbia in 2005, and now we move to Christina Olson, who received her PhD from Columbia in 2006, when we were in our golden age and still had Joan Ferrante here. So this was a wonderful working group. Christina did her dissertation on Boccaccio and Dante. Actually, so did Martin. And her view, her lens in particular, was the political and the ways in which Boccaccio picks up political themes and transforms them. Her dissertation, much revised, has just come out as a book from Toronto University Press entitled Courtesy Lost, Dante, Boccaccio, and the Literature of History. She's currently working on sumptuous literature, clothing, governance, and nostalgia in Dante and Boccaccio. And I'm already salivating over all those images of clothing that I'm hoping we're going to have on Digital Dante. She is an assistant professor at George Mason University. Christina Olson.
Thank you for the invitation to come here and speak today. As I'm pulling up my file here, I just want to say it's wonderful to see what you all have been doing. It's really impressive work. I'm going to be using it a lot in the classroom for research, but also pedagogically. And so it's really great and exciting to see what's going on. And if I use this, this works, obviously. Okay, so I'd like to start off by actually talking about some information that's been coming through on a survey that Chris Kleinhens and I have been doing. This is a survey for a second edition of the MLA Approaches to Teaching Dante, which many of you completed that survey, so thank you. And one of the questions was about the visual arts materials that are used in the classroom in order to teach Dante. And you should know that a lot of the responses are, you know, we use websites that have been featuring a kind of traditional set repertoire of artists. So here in terms of Doré, obviously Botticelli and Dali is something that's very unique to the Digital Dante website, and that's being acknowledged there. And what they would like to see is more modern work. So by including Birk, Digital Dante is responding to an apparent need that has already been expressed, which has been out there. And so it's going to be useful to scholars and students alike. So for those of you who are not familiar with Sandow Birk's work, I'll be talking a bit about his adaptation of the comedy, and then talking you through the relationship between Birk and Doré to show you how it's so important to have Birk if you have Doré, to show the genealogy of Birk's work with Doré in particular, and to kind of sort of follow through with those different generations of adaptations, right? With adaptations of adaptations. Okay. So offering graphic novel style, full page illustrations and an accompanying free verse translation, Sandow Birk's comedy translates the world of Dante's Commedia to an urban American landscape, with the Inferno set in Los Angeles, Purgatorio in San Francisco, with an excursion to Tokyo, and Paradiso in New York City, with moments in Tijuana, Mexico City, and Mecca, and thereby envisions the Commedia in the political and social terms of an American postmodern experience. Birk's illustrations evoke graphic novel aesthetics, as well as the composition and figures of Gustave Doré's 135 engravings to the Commedia. What the art critic Doug Harvey calls the vernacular graphic style of lowbrow comics, tattoos, and skateboards becomes the practice by which Birk offers a poignant satire of the urban realities of a globalized America. And this means that it includes invented and authentic icons of American existence. So we're going to have McDonald's, for example, featured very prominently within Paradiso, but then store signs, street signs, and other language that can be found in the postmodern landscape, the postmodern urban landscape in particular. So this distinguishes Birk's illustrations from those of Doré, and also distinguishes his work from two other prominent illustrators, right, of the comedy in the postmodern era. And here I'm speaking about Salvador Dali. Oops, skipping ahead. There we have Salvador Dali, and here's Arachne, who produced 100 lithographs between 1951 and 1952, and then also, going backwards, Tom Phillips, who was the author of 139 prints between 1976 and 1983, and what you saw earlier was Robert Rauschenberg, who executed 34 images, right, of the Inferno between 1959 and 1960. And his work, however, comes a bit closer to Birk's insofar as it incorporates lots of language, newspaper clippings, newspaper and magazine clippings, scribbled over with designs and words and washed through with colors, and therefore can be seen as much more of a postmodern precursor to Birk's own work. So Birk's adaptation of the Commedia began with his experience viewing Duré's illustrations. And as such, it's an adaptation of an adaptation. And therefore, the importance for having this genealogy on the website. And here you can look at the text that has been underlined to understand how it is that Birk came to the work. And Birk is really a refreshing artist to work with because of his lack of pretension and absolute honesty when it comes to the process that he employs. So he has, no qualms about sort of saying that it really began with him looking at the illustrations, with looking at Duré, and then that eventually led him back to the text. And here, I don't mean to underestimate the intellectual capabilities of our current students. Quite the contrary, I think that they live in a very visual world, and we need to figure or imagine the fact that this might be the direction in which many students of ours come to Dante as well. So he claimed that he wanted to recreate the form and feeling of Duré's illustrations, which he calls it being Victorian. And what he means by that, I would argue, is that he wants to recreate the topography that we find within Duré's illustrations, right? So the rugged natural landscapes, the Michelangelo's nudes, and so forth, and then replace certain objects with, urban icons, urban items, buildings, apartment buildings, etc. And here you can see such an example. So what I'll be showing you today is a lot of the images from Birk in contrast with Duré. And if I can sort of offer this as an idea that came to me while I was sitting here and listening to Julie's presentation, it would be wonderful if on Digital Dante there was this ability to do this with Birk's images, to have them side by side with the Duré so that you could see this. Okay, so as you can see here in their respective illustrations of Inferno 1, Duré's Selva Oscura here becomes an alleyway with ventilation ducts, and do you see specifically how the roots of the trees get picked up here as the ventilation ducts? So Birk gives great attention to this detail. We have newspaper vending machines next to barbed wire, trash containers, and then we have what you can't see here perhaps as well, we have the liquor, which should be over there, etc. So instead of vines, right, we have all of these, what we would see if we were walking in an alleyway today. Okay. So the other relationship between Duré and Birk comes from the ways in which Duré really created the art book as a luxury item. And I skipped over this. This was the first slide, so bear with me while I go back. So these are the three leather-bound volumes that were published by Trillium Press. And you can purchase the Purgatory and the Paradiso, these are Birk's, right, for a total of $14,000. And a lot of our critics see this as pointing up an irony, right? That you would have images of homelessness and urban decay being sold at such a high price. So when Doré priced his illustrations of the comedy at an exorbitant cost of 100 francs, he was seen as sort of upping the capital, right, for what was seen then as a kind of graphic style. And this actually limited Doré to a great deal in the sense that Doré could never escape the identification of being a popular artist, even though he wanted to be taken more seriously, right, within the Beaux-Arts salons. And so in an interesting juxtaposition, right, Birk takes these images and uses his graphic style to create incredibly expensive art. So let's look through some of these images. And this is going to be a wild and crazy ride. Okay, so the cameos. There are cameos that introduce each canto within his Divine Comedy. And truly, in comparison to what Doré did, Birk illustrated much, much more, especially when it comes to the Paradiso. And here you're going to see that the images, the cameos, are specific usually to, not somewhat specific to the canto, but definitely specific to the canticle, right? In the sense of the feelings that one could imagine, an overturned shopping cart or an expired parking meter within the Inferno. So these are obviously themed. When you get to Purgatorio, there's a tinge of hope. Here we have things like ascending ramps and parking garages, right? Gumball machines. And then Paradiso, you have images of emotional or physical satisfaction. So the ways in which Birk Americanizes, right, what Doré did, you can even see here in his illustration to Inferno 5. He gives Virgil, obviously, a toga. Virgil's toga is now the American flag, obviously much more signage, not the romantic dimensions and the perspective that we have of the Doré. You can imagine, right, certainly in the canto of the gluttonous, the way that this comes through. So we have the corpulent bodies, right, the Michelangelo's nudes that are within Doré, and these become even more exaggerated within Birk to emphasize gluttony as a part of our consumerist culture. When we get to the city of Dis, which you can see here, in contrast is more signage, and I'm going to skip ahead here. Oops. Slide didn't get through. But what maybe you can see a bit on the right is that we have, 7-Eleven, a gas stand, and so forth. So you can't escape from these global brands of culture. Certainly not within the Inferno 10, where we have Bank of America right behind Farinata. And Farinata, by the way, is holding a cold drink. It looks like something from Starbucks, right? Okay. And here you can see it a bit better. So in certain ways, nationalism, right, skip ahead, has become a kind of empty ism here, right? So here, and in the same way, so has classicism, right? So the illustration of Inferno 12, we have a smiling, instead of the Minotaur that we see on the left with Doré, we have a smiling Minotaur here on top of his pita stand. So he looks a little bit more like the Ronald McDonald of the Mediterranean. Okay, right. And the pigeons in the Wood of the Suicides are eating McDonald's French fries. So, and then the gradual transition to lower hell is marked by urban planning, overpopulation, traffic. You can see it here specifically in the illustration of Inferno 15. And then we obviously move to other signs of urbanization, right? And overpopulation, dependence upon gas fuels. We have an SUV that stands in for Geryon. Okay, right. And in the illustration to 19, Inferno 19, we're in an actual parking lot, and you can't really see it that well here, but it's the Malabolge Convention Center where the devils are playing against the city of Dis. Lucifer himself is not buried in ice, but in a highway exchange filled with traffic congestion. And again, more signs and so forth. We have a Subway, we have a Taco Bell, coffee shops, U-Haul, all of these images appear throughout. So I'm going to have us move through here. Here we have in Inferno 29 and the depiction also of the falsifiers. It actually recalls our dependence not just upon gasoline, as here we're in an Exxon gas station, if you see that here, but also credit cards and the image here, the lower next to that body that is sitting, and so an indictment of usury as well. So where the social commentary comes through in a very big way in various moments, one in particular in Inferno 23, right, where in his depiction of the hypocrites instead, we have the LAPD police, okay? And so here we see that creative adaptation of Dante's social commentary, right, where Birk is going to aim his satire at those who work for the state, and that's where he locates hypocrisy. Okay. So getting into purgatory. Purgatory is different for Birk insofar as it begins to highlight linguistic and ethnic diversity. We see that specifically here when we have the sudden excursion. We leave San Francisco, which is where he sets it, and we go to Tokyo. And so these are the ways in which Birk tries to translate the emotional experience of the pilgrim being sort of emotionally transported. Actually, excuse me, not only just him, but Statius being emotionally transported by this incredibly charged experience of seeing Virgil there. We have a prevalence of Spanish-speaking communities here, not just with our Aunt Danielle, but with the characterization of Beatrice, who is portrayed as Latina here. As you can see here in particular, right, her characterization with this sort of sassy facial expression, which she often bears in lots of the illustrations, and then the indignant hand that's placed on her right hip, right, the ways in which Birk retains these racial stereotypes. Okay, so then moving into Paradise. Paradise is interesting because this is where Birk couldn't rely upon always adapting Doré, so he had to kind of go out on his own. And what he does is portray sort of these thoughtful interior moments of reflection, even amongst large crowds. This is one example in front of the New York Public Library. But then what he includes in a very interesting dramatic move is how other religions, right, and not just consumerism, is going to enter within our new interpretations of the Divine Comedy. And this is really where it gets radical. For example, here we have the Hindu temple for the Gate of Purgatory, and as well we have Saraswati, depicted here, thanks to Akash for that point, included within Paradise. She is the Virgin Mary, and he changes the center of the rose to Mecca itself, which is the huge radical move, right? So instead we have the Kaaba instead of the center of the celestial rose. And so in this way, the Imperium becomes the realm of Islam and not that of Christianity. And there was a reference made earlier to Professor Berolini's essay on images of the other. And there's a way in which one can hypothesize here that Birk, whether or not he knows that he's doing it, is picking up on some of Dante's non-normative stances toward other religions and cultures. So this is what I wanted to show you. And for those of you who are interested in Birk's work, right now he's currently actually completing an illustrated Quran. So for those of you interested in sort of studying how he includes these other cultures and other religions, there's a way in which you could put it within the context of his own work. But it's a radical move in terms of the combination of text and image. So I think it's going to be a great addition on the site, and thank you again for inviting me here. See you.
Thank you, Christina. I hereby want to make sure that you understand that you're invited to curate this section of Digital Dante. And I put your little commentaries, everything you want, and I love the idea of having the Doré, because that will totally transform how we see Doré. It's quite as well as Birk. And we've seen Doré so much, it's a cliche. This will give us a whole new approach to that. I hope you will consider that an invitation. So we're now moving into our concluding section. We have our image editor Meredith Levin, who is also emblematic, at this point, everything is emblematic, of we've talked a lot about communities in time, how people never have to graduate because through the web, they can contribute their work. We also have communities in space created by Digital Dante because frankly, I do not think that there's been so much collaboration between the library and the Department of Italian as there has been since we've met Meredith and all started working together. So it's been wonderful to work with her, and she is now formally our image editor. As you've already heard, she's the one who found the volumes in the rare books and manuscript library that we have been able to feature. And of course, the featuring of those volumes on the site is another way of showcasing the synergy between the libraries and the scholarly pedagogic enterprises. And of course, Cedars is in the libraries also. So it's all one wonderful enterprise. And Meredith has organized a roundtable that is featuring our now actually graduate students. Grace Del Molino, who's in her 4th year and is senior assistant editor of Digital Dante and is working on Boccaccio and canon law for her dissertation. And we also have, for the roundtable part, not yet the reading, if I'm correct, am I right? We also have Juliana Visco, who's in her 3rd year and working a lot on material culture and food, and you should meet Danielle Caligari, who's right behind you. And Matteo Pace, working on medicine in the Middle Ages, also a 3rd-year graduate student. And I'm just looking around the room, I've completely left my notes behind. Nassim Chida, also a 3rd-year graduate student, working on issues of medieval history with respect to the Divine Comedy. Looking forward to lots of wonderful genealogies and other things of that sort. And Luke Rosenau, who is completing his dissertation on the Corbaccio, and who really is our resident digital genius. I mean, really, he should not be here. He should be in Silicon Valley making a fortune. He does the most, actually, I learned this about him when he made a clip the year that the video game Inferno came out. We were all talking about it one day in class I was carrying on, and Luke's response was to create a clip, which we do have to put on Digital Dante, absolutely. And are you going to show any of the animations today of the Sistina? I guess. Anyway, so he makes incredible animations. And is there anybody else whom I've left off who's on the round table? I know Allison's not here, so I think I got you all. Okay.
So, as Akash and Teo and lots of people have mentioned, I'm the image editor, and I'll just say that when I first started attending meetings about Digital Dante, all of the editors were sort of deep in discussion about what image to choose for the homepage. This was serious business. We all could agree that we didn't want any of those sort of traditional, ubiquitous portraits of Dante, and we thought about using some of Botticelli's drawings of the Commedia, but we weren't sure, since they're very subtle, whether that would translate to the web. And so we're thinking, and it occurred to me that we have a treasure trove here at Columbia University, which is the Rare Book and Manuscript Library. And so I worked with our curator of rare books, Jane Siegel, and I organized a little field trip for Akash, Teo, and myself, which was amazing. And we went up and we looked at about a dozen editions of the Commedia, some from as early as the late 15th century through the 18th century. And we landed on the 3 favorites that we ended up choosing for this site. You can see I have one up here. So for this one, this is the 1487 edition of the Commedia, which is really one of the earliest. I think the first printed edition was in 1472, so this is right up there. And what we loved about this was sort of the cruder woodcut images, and some of them, like this one, were hand-colored. And they even had little mini captions, which were inscribed by a careful reader in or around the 15th century. So this is Inferno 15. And you can see there's a little caption under Dante, and he's leaning down to talk to Brunetto Latini. And then on the right is Virgil in the blue robe. Then moving on, we also loved the more intricate copper engravings from the 1568 edition. with its incredibly detailed maps of hell, purgatorio, and heaven. And here we see the map of hell. But then we stumbled upon the 1544 edition, and we sort of knew that we had hit the jackpot because it had beautifully vivid illustrations of almost every canto. A lot of them were, actually all of them are hand-colored, and they're all really evocative. And I will just show you that this is the image we ended up choosing for the home page, which you saw before, a portion of it. This is the full-sized image. It's the image that precedes Canto 1 of Paradiso. And again, it shows Dante and Beatrice gazing at the heavens as they prepare to ascend. This seemed to us like a fitting way to welcome a new generation of researchers to Digital Dante. And thanks to the hard work of the developers at Cedars, a lot of the elements in the image, like the twinkling stars, make repeat appearances throughout the site, which is a really nice sort of consistency. So now I'd like to turn our attention to the amazing graduate student editors, without whose hard work a lot of the more exciting elements of the site wouldn't be possible. First, some of the other assistant editors are going to talk about their individual research projects and how they might eventually be incorporated into the larger Digital Dante initiative. And then Grace, our senior assistant editor, is going to talk about the many hats she's worn over the course of the project. So, Julianne.
Okay. Sure. So my biggest takeaway from the experience with the intertextual connections that I was able to make while I was audio editing some of Professor Barolini's lectures, because whatever papers I was working on simultaneously usually seemed initially unrelated to whatever Conti I was randomly assigned to tag. But then, nevertheless, I would always find these amazing connections between what I was working on and what Conti I was editing, and that was just a really great sort of lesson. And how I anticipate using the Digital Dante Forum in the future is that I'm hoping I would like to sort of trace these sites of production of knowledge and things that are referenced in or gestured at in the Tenzone between Forese, Donati, and Dante, especially sites of exchange of knowledge between different groups, so sort of hospitals and butcher shops and tanneries and the mint and the prisons and all of the places that get mentioned there. So this would be a continuation of an idea from a previous graduate student, and I think that the Digital Dante platform would sort of allow this idea to really come to life and let the readers explore this sort of contemporary geography in a less textual way and in a really interrelated way. So that's sort of word of the day of hypertext. I think will also allow this work to connect to my colleagues, especially Nassim's work with genealogies. There's so much about the different families and different neighborhoods investing in different infrastructure that could really be highlighted well in this type of forum. So,
So my experience with Digital Dante was my first experience of digital humanities. It involved roughly 3 tasks. The first one was, as Juliana mentioned, the audio editing of Professor Barolini's lectures for the course on the Commedia. Then it was describing the images from the rare books and manuscript library, and 3, it was thinking of ways in which such a project could contribute to my future work as a scholar and vice versa. Editing the lectures was by far the most enjoyable, remunerated work I've ever performed. And it made me realize the value of being guided through a poem together with students from different disciplines. And of course the importance of close reading. Most importantly, on the second and third exposure, Professor Barolini's lectures were a way of absorbing a whole new strategy of reading and engaging with the centuries of commentaries. I can truly say that these lectures are quite unique since I spent 3 years taking weekly lectures on the Commedia as an undergraduate. Describing the images was a joint activity with Matteo and Juliana. It provided me with the best way of apprehending manuscript illustrations of the Commedia, and also made me think about the Commedia in a didactic perspective. I had to think about what first-time readers would need to know in order to engage with the images, in what way does it illuminate early reception and the poem itself. Finally, thinking about the impact of the project on my own work and vice versa, the site affords endless possibilities for improvement, obviously. My own doctoral research will involve detailed family trees of the Donati and the Gherardesca, but also other families, and also cataloging networks of connections. So one example that is often mentioned is Fragomita, Michele Zanche, Ugolino, and Nino, and Guido da Montefeltro, for example, that are all connected in ways that do not transpire in a very simple family tree. In the future, I hope that the project will allow users to follow these threads that connect the characters and see links that may well have been known to Dante's first readers. And in doing so, I hope the project will help uncover new discourses embedded in the poem and generate new perspectives, which in turn may spark new projects.
The opportunities given by a digital project like the one we are discussing today are endless, and I just want to say a few words about how I intend to contribute to the Dante Digital Project in the long run, maybe. Digital resources are renowned to be able to perform tasks that would take humans years or a humongous amount of intellectual energy. For example, intra and intertextual research, usually based on mnemonic knowledge, would be highly intensified by a resource able to connect different texts. And think about Julie's work on Ovid and Dante, Akash on the vernacular poetry of the 13th century. In my viewpoint, a systematic rimario of the Commedia would be an essential element to the study of Dante's works, and especially one that would make Dante Digital Project different from any other resource online now. It would be a good starting point to integrate, for example, Arianna Punzi's Rimario della Commedia di Dante Alighieri, published in 2003 and just on paper format, both with similar projects dealing with a systemic archive of rhymes and with the power of technology. Punzi's Rimario is not just a catalog of the rhymes used in the Commedia, but by means of the entire terzina rhyming structure, this shows how Dante's metrical memory connects distant cantos together. Moreover, if this project were added to our digital Dante, it would be a good opportunity to open this direction to Dante's coeval vernacular literatures, French, Provençal, and of course Italian, in order to show how intertextuality works in our first grade literary historian. Similar projects have been carried out in Europe in the aim to show how metrics work systematically in medieval vernacular literatures. I'm referring to projects going on now at Sapienza, but also other universities in Europe, like the database of European lyric, that is trying to connect different corpora of medieval lyric. Trovador, edited by Rocco Distilo for Provençal poetry, Trouveur, edited by Paolo Canettieri for the Old French, Trovadores, edited by Mercedes Vrea for the Galician Portuguese, and the Lirica Italiana delle Origini, edited by Linneo Leonardi for the Italian poetry. A systematic database connecting different corpora of rhymes would be a precious resource for the study of the Commedia, and one able to show the intra and intertextual connections that Dante was making with other poets and within his own works. Thus far, such a direction has been taken just with the help of memory, and everybody knows, for instance, the Reimbildung, Nome come lume, Eco in Cavalcantis Donna me prega in Inferno 10, or the one connecting through the Reimbildung, Scarche, Marche, Imbarche, Guinizelli's sonnet Guittone, and Dante's Purgatorio 26. Who knows what opportunities are still to be revealed, and I'm sure the Dante Digital Project is the right resource for such an investigation.
We are very shortly going to be enjoying the Sestina readings, and so I'm just here to sort of announce and shine a light on an angle of the Digital Dante website, which is the Sestina page. And there, it's just was an attempt to capture and to share this amazing discovery, and this amazing way of reading things. And the day of that it was recorded, on the May 8th, 2014, there was the Vincent Aliberto, who had the presence of mind, there he is back, recording right now, who had the presence of mind to realize what was happening immediately and move from a single mic situation to a span mic situation. So now they are full stereophonic recordings of what you're going to hear now, and they sound wonderful on headphones. And they connect with people too. People who are not even scholarly in their pursuits of sestinas, put them on and they enjoy moving through the sonic space that is created through these recordings. And that's really something special. And so how to feature that on a website, then there is the scrolling text, which is just embedding with some time, so that instead of having to scramble all over, you are accompanied with the words through it. And also, just tagged along with that, on the bottom you can find some animations that I did of sestinas, which I did for fun. This is the wonderful thing about, and that's what I just want to say, feel a very deep appreciation for that, because there are these just little things where I'm just sitting at home doing something, and then it pops out and it's a project, because everyone has an insane amount of technology at home and here, and it's not just word processors, everyone has it. So then where do those type of non-academic sort of creative interpretations find a home? And I think this is one angle.
Well, I realize we're running out of time, so I'm going to keep it brief. But I think we've seen from all of the talks today and the graduate panel how many directions there are still to go with Digital Dante and the really radical new avenues that this site opens up for exploration of Dante's texts. And I'm detecting sort of two fundamental themes that I would say are tenets of Professor Barolini's scholarship. One of which is historicizing, right? The call to historicize Dante. Digital Dante makes it much easier than it's ever been before to bring together different historical texts and put things in conversation with each other in a way that allows us to access the historical grounding of the Commedia and Dante's other works. Another crucial thread, I would say, is reception history, which means both looking at Dante's reception of other authors, as we heard from Julie with the intertextual Dante and Ovid project, as well as other readers and artists and thinkers' reception of Dante. And I think these images are so beautifully emblematic of that idea of learning from the reception, because we have these 1544 printings of the Divine Comedy, which Meredith tells me probably were not colored in their original printing. I mean, we know that they were hand colored, right? Because they, colored presses are a little tricky, but the person who hand colored these printings came somewhat later than the printing itself, which, you can see how vibrantly those colors stand out on the page, so that leads us to assume they came much later. And I think that's just such a beautiful example of the kind of meshing of the idiosyncratic, personal individual with the more traditional and authoritative that we find in Dante's own works and in some of the best Dante scholarship out there today, right? Where you have the sort of template, the printed edition upon which an individual reader brought their own interpretation to bear. And I believe there was talk of producing a Dante coloring book based on the black and white images that you all will be able to color in. And so thinking about this sort of layering of reception, layering of interpretation, thinking about what Jen said about the sort of iterations of the site, how there is no original site, but it went through progressive versions, brought me to two big buzzwords in digital humanities that I think are also really important for Dante, and they are innovation and iteration. Innovation being literally, from the Latin novus, the new, the process of creating what is new. Iteration from iterum, which again, the going back, the repetition. And at first, it might seem that these two concepts are sort of contradictory with each other, right? That you're, on the one hand, trying to create something new, but on the other hand, going back and repeating. And I think we're going to see in the Sestina readings, which we're going to get to in a moment, and I'm sure you're all very excited for, we're going to see how these two concepts can be brought together in Dante's work as they are in Digital Dante. And I will leave it there because I can tell we're all excited to hear the Sestinas.
With respect to the Sestina, first I have to introduce two more performers. And they are Carlo Arrigoni, who is a second-year graduate student, endowed with a magnificent bass voice that complements very well Matteo, and who, in my Petrarch class last year, proved to himself to be such an extraordinary Sestina reader that even though he calls himself a modernist, we begged him to come and lend his services once more. And then the young woman, a senior at Barnard College, whom I think really, in a moment of we were all, it was a very, so the Petrarch class was last spring, but a year ago, last fall, was my medieval lyric class. That was a very small and intense group, and we were about 7, I think, and one day, just talking, it came up, and I think it was Isabella Livorni, whom I am introducing now, who is a musicologist and a humanist and a very gifted singer and a senior at Barnard, as I said. And I think it was Isabella who said, well, let's try, instead of doing it the way we've been reading, let's try assigning a voice to a rhyme word. And the results were incantatory, and so that happened in the fall of 2000 and 2013, and in the spring of 2014, we got organized, and on one particular day, with Vin's help, it was video with Elena Hecht from the college, it was edited, and with Luke really made it all happen, and I really hope you go to the website and see Luke's animations of the Sistina as you listen with your headphones. And I have to say, I want to get Luke's animations for each heaven of Paradiso. I want those seizures. So now Carlo and Isabella will join the others, and that will conclude our events.
Al poco giorno e al gran cerchio d'ombra,
Son giunto lasso ed al bianchir dei colli,
Quando si perde lo color nell'erba,
E il mio disio però non cangia il verde.
Si è barbato nella dura petra,
che parla e sente come fosse donna. Similemente questa nuova donna,
si sta gelata come neve all'ombra,
che non la muove se non come petra,
il dolce tempo che riscalda i colli.
E che li fa tornar di bianco in verde.
perché li copre di fioretti ed erba. Quando ella in testa una ghirlanda d'erba,
trae della mente nostra ogni altra donna.
Perché si mischia il crespo giallo e il verde.
sì bel ch'amor gli viene a stare all'ombra,
Che m'ha serrato in trapiccioli colli.
più forte assai che la calcina petra. La sua bellezza ha più virtù che petra,
il corpo suo non può sanar per erba.
Che io son fuggito per piani e per colli.
Per poter scampar da cotà donna.
e dal suo lume non mi può far ombra,
Poggio né muro mai né fronda verde. Io l'ho veduta già vestita a verde.
sì fatta che ella avrebbe messo in petra,
l'amor ch'io porto pure alla sua ombra.
Ond'io l'ho chesta in un bel prato d'erba,
Innamorata come ancor fu donna.
E chiuso intorno d'altissimi colli. Ma ben ritorneranno i fiumi a colli.
Prima che questo legno molle e verde.
S'infiammi come suol far bella donna.
di me che mi torrei dormire in petra.
tutto il mio tempo è gir pascendo l'erba.
Sol per vederdo i suoi panni fanno ombra,
Quantunque i colli.
fan più nera ombra,
Sotto un bel verde.
La giovane donna.
La fa sparer con buon petra,
Sotterba.
Ok, so for this one io so prima perché so donna.
ma io che sono l'ultima.
Tu sei luce?
Io sono
petra.
Sei Petra? Sì, tu sei ultima.
Luce. Io sono luce.
So this one isn't quite a sestina. This is Dante's Canzone Sestina, which is just five lines. Okay. Amor, tu vedi ben che questa donna,
La tua vertù non cura in alcun tempo.
che suol dell'altre belle farsi donna, e poi s'accorse che ella era mia donna.
Per lo tuo raggio ch'al voto mi luce.
D'ogni crudelità si fece donna, sì che non par che l'abbia cor di donna.
ma di qual fiera l'ha d'amor più freddo, che per lo tempo caldo e per lo freddo
Mi fa sembiante pur come una donna.
Che fosse fatta d'una bella petra, per man di quei che mi intagliasse in petra. E io, che son costante più che petra,
In ubbidirti per bieltà di donna,
porto nascoso il colpo della petra, con la qual tu mi desti come a petra,
Che t'avesse innoiato lungo tempo.
tal che mandò al core ov'io son petra, e mai non si scoperse alcuna petra.
O da splendor di sole o da sua luce, che tanta avesse né virtù né luce.
Che mi potesse attar da questa petra,
sicch'ella non mi meni col suo freddo, colà dov'io sarò di morte freddo. Signor, tu sai che per al gente freddo,
l'acqua diventa cristallina petra.
là sotto tramontana ova il gran freddo, e l'aere sempre in elemento freddo,
vi si converte, sì che l'acqua è donna.
in quella parte per cagion del freddo, così dinanzi dal sembiante
Mi
freddo,
ghiaccia sopra il sangue d'ogni tempo. E quel pensiero che m'accorcia il tempo.
mi si converte tutto in corpo freddo.
Che mesce poi per mezzo della luce, là onde entrò la dispietata luce. E lei s'accoglie d'ogni bieltà luce.
così di tutta crudeltà del freddo.
Le corre al core ove non va tua luce, perché negli occhi sì bella mi luce,
Quando la miro, ch'io la veggio in Petra,
e poi in ogni altro ov'io volga mia luce. Dagli occhi suoi mi ven la dolce luce,
che mi fa non caler d'ogni altra donna, così foss'ella più pietosa donna.
ver me che chiamo di notte e di luce.
Solo per lei servire, e luogo e tempo, né per altro disio viver gran tempo. Però vertù che sei prima che tempo,
Prima che moto e che sensibil luce,
increscati di me, così mal tempo, entra in coro mai, che benne tempo,
Sì che per te nesca fuor lo freddo,
che non mi lascia ver, come altri, tempo, che se mi giunge lo tuo forte tempo,
in tal stato questa gentil Petra mi vedrà coricare in poca Petra,
per non levarmi se non dopo il tempo.
Quando vedrò se mai fu bella donna nel mondo come questa acerba donna. Canzone, io porto nella mente donna,
tal che con tutto ch'ella mi sia Petra,
mi dà baldanza, ond'ogni uom mi par freddo, sì ch'io ardisco a far per questo freddo,
la novità che per tua forma luce.
Che non fu mai pensata in alcun tempo.